Yes, it is still one of Canada's most frustrating, heartbreaking, and unresolved mysteries. The events of January 26, 1950 remain inconclusive. The fact that it occurred on a developed, dependable aircraft is the worst part, because Douglas C-54 Skymaster is a legend in a way. During World War II, it was among the first planes to transport the first being President Franklin D. Roosevelt. President's plane was nicknamed the Sacred Cow, and it was basically a converted C-54 Skymaster that was used to fly him to the Yalta Conference in 1945. If it handled the President of the United States, I suppose it was truly a dependable aircraft. Although both Lockheed Constellation and British Handley Page Hermes were great as well. The C-54 has a wingspan of almost 12, a length of about 90 feet, a crew of 4, and a maximum capacity of 50 personnel. Its 4 air-cooled radial piston engines are Pratt & Whitney R2000 twin Wasp 14 cylinders. The range is up to 4,000 miles and the top speed is 275 miles per hour. The team was not saved by all of that. It was most likely the severe weather. In spite of everything, there are still people competing to be pilots. Perhaps the most attractive branch for young men is the Air Force. Prior to being briefly involved with the intelligence and propaganda detachment, I served in the Navy, infantry, and artillery. Regretfully, I never had anything to do with the Air Force back home, save from the fact that my old squad mate and neighbor became a pilot of a Mi-17 helicopter fairly early in his post-conflict military career. Like a lot of young boys, I wanted to be a pilot. I mean, who doesn't? Pilots and astronauts are perhaps the first occupations that come to mind when a 6-year-old is asked what he wants to do with his life. So in 1979, I was given my first scale model. It was a Matchbox BF-109, and I believe it was ML3 on a scale of 1 to 32. Later, I became so enamored with scale models that I began collecting whatever I could get my hands on. Revell is mainly for ships and Airfix is mainly for airplanes. And I quickly moved from Airfix to Avirex in 10 years, and the individualistic pilot hero culture was contagious, so it feels like I really never really grew up. Modern aircraft don't really appeal to me. I'm mainly interested in older models, particularly those from the 1930s to the 1950s. So this episode is in a way perfect for me. And also, this episode from today's episode might have been about Twilight Zone, X-Files, or the awful Canadian clone Psi Factor. The truth is that planes do disappear, and just because we don't know what happened doesn't mean that there has been an alien abduction, a riddle surrounding the Bermuda Triangle, or a wormhole to a different realm or universe. From Oceanic Airlines in Lost, which is also one of my favorite TV shows, to Shepherd by Ken Forsyth and The Langoliers, I think it's Stephen King, which has been one of my favorite books since I was 8 years old. There is something really alluring about phantom or missing planes. Flying and strange occurrences are like whipped cream and chestnut puree, but I suppose you wouldn't get the point. Anyway, there isn't a romantic soaring fantasy that can keep me from being pitiful. You know how awful heights are, and I truly detest them. Even though I visited Paris a few times, I had never seen the Eiffel Tower. You couldn't persuade me, not even for $10,000, to visit the CN Tower. That one time I was frightened, the one time I flew with Cessna to film the city from above for my TV station. I was terrified, and a couple of years later we got into a storm over Turkey when traveling to Cyprus, and my ex-wife was making fun of me for trying not to scream. What a hero. Do you also know how I came here to Canada, how I arrived here? with German wings. Enough for the wise, in any case. As the United States prepared to enter World War II, the War Department assumed responsibility for the provision orders for the Douglas DC-4 airlines in June of 1941 and assigned them to the U.S. Army Air Forces under the title C-54 Skymaster. On February 14, 1942, the first C-54 took off from Cloverfield in Santa Monica, California. During World War II and the Korean War, the U.S. Army Air Forces flew the Douglas C-54 Skymaster, a four-engine transport aircraft. The C-54 was based on a commercial aircraft, the Douglas DC-4, just like the Douglas C-47 Skytrain was based on the DC-3. The C-54 transported military personnel, presidents, and prime ministers in addition to freight. So numerous C-54 variants were used for a wide range of non-combat missions, including missile tracking and recovery, scientific and military research, and air-sea rescue. It transported food, supplies, and coal to West Berlin during the Berlin airlift. And throughout aviation history, several planes have mysteriously vanished, leaving behind unanswered questions and fueling countless theories. Here are some of the most notable cases. You must have watched Amelia, the film that chronicles the life of Amelia Earhart, who mysteriously disappeared while attempting to fly around the world in 1937. And later on, many more mysterious cases emerged, and some of the most famous one were Flight 19 on December 5, 1945, then Stardust on August 2, 1947, Canadian Pacific Airlines Flight 3505 on July 21, 1951, Pan Am Flight 7 on November 8, 1957, Flying Tiger Line Flight 739 on March 16, 1962, and also Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 on March 8, 2014, and so on. On January 26, 1950, which by the way was the day India became a sovereign republic instead of a dominion, Joyce Espe, who was Indian native from Hapu and who was having a hard time surviving the Alaskan winter, took off with the rest of the crew. It was a snowy day shortly before 10 in the morning. The sun rose, and by 5 in the evening, everything was once more dark. At the time, she was traveling on leave from the military post in Anchorage, south over the Yukon to Great Falls, Montana, with her son and 42 other American service members. She intended to give birth to her second kid in Rifle, Colorado, where she had close connections. And the guys on board were all military personnel, with the exception of Joyce, Victor, and a civilian technician. Another passenger, Jones, was preparing to leave the military in order to marry his fiancée. 2 hours into its 8-hour flight, the plane established its final radio contact. The pilot reported that everything was going according to plan, with the exception of ice on the wings. The aircraft never touched down in Montana, and no one can possibly guess what happened. Before her flight, Master Sergeant Robert Espe, her husband of the United States Air Force, cautioned Joyce in his final words, "Give the baby to Sergeant Roy Jones if you have to jump." The plane belonged to the Strategic Air Command's 1st Strategic Support Squadron, which was based at Biggs AFB in Texas. An earlier effort to leave had been postponed for several hours because of an issue with one of its 4 engines. A search and rescue operation was initiated after the jet failed to reach Montana. Up to 85 American and Canadian aircraft, along with 7,000 troops, searched 350,000 square miles of the Pacific Northwest. That is incredible. And the fact that troops and equipment had already been transported north for the next exercise, Sweetbriar, a combined Canada-United States wargame scenario, helped in the search. The operation left searchers perplexed due to muddled radio communications and multiple false positive reports of smoke signals. Search efforts were hindered by pilots' lack of training in search and rescue tactics, including the lack of specific search patterns. Despite the fact that every crew member survived, 3 plane crashes occurred during the search expedition, highlighting the perils of the Yukon terrain. A C-47 from the 57th Fighter Wing, Air Force serial number 451015, which was taking part in the search, stopped and crashed in the McClintock Mountains close to Whitehorse on January 30th. There were no fatalities, but its crew members suffered injuries. The pilot flagged down a truck to signal for help for his 5 to 8 crew members after walking 13 kilometers to the Alaska Highway. That's incredible as well, like it must have been cold. A C-47D 451037 from Elson Air Force Base, which was part of the 5010th Wing Search, crashed on a mountainside south of Ashikik Lake on February 7. There were no fatalities among the 10 crew members on board. A Royal Canadian Air Force C-47 KJ-936 went down close to Snag on February 16. Once more, luckily only minor injuries were suffered by its 4 crew members, and its debris would later be mistaken for the lost C-54 for a brief period of time. Unintelligible radio signals, including some near the plane's failed second check-in town of Ashikik, were reported to have been heard by 2 planes and 2 radio stations in the Yukon area on February 2nd. However, efforts to identify the source proved unsuccessful. In the interior of British Columbia, near Beaver Lake, 500 miles south of the Yukon border, 250 miles northeast of Vancouver, and 200 miles west of the Alaska Highway air route, a lone settler also claimed to have seen a big plane over his house. On February 14, the search planes were dispatched to the Gulf of Alaska to look for a missing B-36 bomber during a simulated nuclear attack mission from Alaska to Montana that had been carrying on a Mark IV nuclear bomb, a bomb without a radioactive core, and the mission was placed on indefinite hold. The wreckage of the B-36 was later found. And I think I'll cover the Peruvian Air Force UFO encounter first, but this might make good fodder for a future episode. Anyways, so the search was formally ended on February 20th, 1950, and the passengers next of kin were notified that they were thought to be dead. On the traffic flight 2469, there were 44 passengers and crew members, including Staff Sergeant Clarence Anderson Gibson. He left his wife, 2 young girls aged 2 and 5, and an unborn baby girl behind. And 62 years later, Brundage resident Judy Gibson Jackson continues to hope that the Skymaster that vanished over the Yukon will be located, providing her and the families of the other 43 passengers who perished some closure. Andrew Gregg was visiting a retired archaeologist named Greg Hare in Whitehorse 68 years after the disappearance of the Skymaster, when he saw an odd object on one of the shelves in the storeroom at Yukon Archaeology. It was a piece of burned airplane equipment that had been rescued. It was twisted, rusted, and tarnished with time. The aircraft most likely came from a drop tank, an auxiliary gasoline container used on long-haul military missions, Hare informed Gregg. And when Hare and a co-worker named Ty Hefner discovered it the previous summer, they momentarily believed it to be a piece of a missing American military aircraft that went missing in 1950 with 44 persons on board. Gregg, a documentary filmmaker, had never heard of the missing C-54 before then. Since then, he has been fixated by it. And he was finishing up filming for a new documentary called Skymaster Down, which is about to crash, the search, and the mystery when he returned to Toronto on Tuesday from the Yukon. One of the worst aviation catastrophes in Canadian history is still the Skymaster crash. Its size alone, however, made it an exception in the north. Just over the Yukon, there have been 510 plane crashes. Over the years, all but 4 of those wrecks have been found, which is the outlandish. I don't know, like out of 510 plane crashes, they only found 4. That's incredible. Again, like so. Even after decades of searching, including an initial search that attracted 98 planes and over 7,000 people, this plane simply won't show up, Greg remarked. Through the We the People petition mechanism, the families of the missing servicemen petitioned the federal government in 2012 to resume the hunt for their loved ones' remains. In 2020, Andrew Gregg was announced as the filmmaker of Sky Masters Down, a documentary that will follow the aircraft's hunt. And on January 16, 2022, the documentary was broadcast on the CBC's documentary channel in Canada. Following the publication of the documentary in 2022, a team in Whitehorse, including a glaciologist, a geologist, and a historian, formed to carry out a new search for the lost plane, employing drones to investigate inaccessible areas. Well, I'll tell you what. Where I see a possibility, and it is probably because I'm not familiar with the technology, is LiDAR, the same fantastic machine that recently discovered Valeriana in Mexico. I'm not sure if the same strategy that works in dense jungles will also work in Yukon. Maybe it's not the same thing. From what I recently read, LiDAR uses laser beams to measure distances and analyze reflected signals to produce 3D maps. Although it works well in clear weather, bad weather, including thick snow, reduces its dependability. So LiDAR is used in remote sensing to track snow depth and ice properties on a broader scale, in addition to vehicle applications. Although it can measure snow depth effectively due to its great precision, its employment under heavy snow or ice layers may still provide challenges. So, all we can do, as usual, is wait for the next big revelation about the Skymaster, although I'm rather certain that it won't be aliens. And that concludes the season's 47th episode, which will be released following episode 48. I know I'm OCDing, just in case, but I'm sure you don't mind. So choose your favorite episode from the many available, not just the latest two, and let me know what else you would like me to look into. Stay selective. Bye-bye.